Have you ever wondered what it really took to build the United States? We often see the grand paintings, the stoic faces on our money, the triumphant declarations. But behind the powdered wigs and quill pens lies a story of grit, desperation, near disaster that's far more dramatic than most history books let on. This isn't just a tale of founding fathers. It's the story of the hidden struggles, the secret deals, and the brutal realities that forged the world's first lasting democracy. Let's rewind to the winter of 1777 at Valley Forge. The image we have is of George Washington kneeling in the snow, a symbol of unwavering faith. But the reality was far grimmer. His Continental Army was a wreck. Out of about 12,000 soldiers, nearly 2,000 died not from battle, but from disease, starvation, and exposure. Men were barefoot, their feet leaving bloody tracks in the snow. They were wrapped in thin, tattered blankets, huddled together against a relentless, freezing wind. Food was so scarce they were boiling their own shoes for a meager broth. Washington's letters from this time are filled with desperation, wrote to Congress, practically begging, unless some great and capital change suddenly takes place. This army must inevitably starve, dissolve, or disperse. Morale was at rock bottom. Soldiers were deserting in droves. There was even a plot known as the Conway Cabal by some of his own officers and members of Congress to replace him. They thought he was incompetent. Imagine that. The man we see as the unshakable leader was on the verge of losing his army and his command. The entire revolution was hanging by a thread, not on a battlefield, but in a frozen, disease-ridden camp. What turned it around? Not a miracle, but relentless persistence and the arrival of a man you might not know, Baron von Steuben. He was a Prussian officer who, despite barely speaking English, drilled the starving, ragged soldiers into a disciplined fighting force. He cursed at them in German and French, and had an aide translate his insults. It was brutal, but it worked. It was this grueling, hands-on transformation at Valley Forge that allowed the army to survive and eventually win. The victory wasn't just won with guns. It was won with sheer, stubborn endurance against unimaginable hardship. Now let's fast forward a decade. The war is won. Hooray, right? It's not so fast. The United States wasn't really united at all. Under the Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution, the central government was powerless. Couldn't tax, couldn't raise an army, couldn't enforce laws. Each state was like its own little country, printing its own money and looking out for its own interests. The nation was broke, and soldiers who had fought and bled for independence hadn't been paid. This brings us to a farmer and war veteran from Massachusetts named Daniel Shays. Like many others, he returned from the war to find himself in crushing debt. The courts were foreclosing on farms and throwing veterans into debtor's prison. These were the very men who had secured the country's freedom. In 1786, Shays led a rebellion. An army of angry farmers, armed with pitchforks and muskets, shut down the courts. They were trying to stop the government from taking their homes. This wasn't just a small protest. It was an armed uprising against the new American government. Shays Rebellion sent a shockwave of terror through the founding fathers. George Washington himself wrote, "We are fast verging to anarchy and confusion." He and others realized their grand experiment in liberty was about to collapse into chaos. The government they had created was too weak to even put down a local rebellion. It was this panic, this very real fear of the nation tearing itself apart, that directly led to the Constitutional Convention of 1787. They didn't just decide to have a meeting for fun. They were forced into it by the crisis Daniel Shays had ignited. The Constitution, the very foundation of American government today, was born from the ashes of a farmer's revolt. So now they're all in a room in Philadelphia, in the dead of summer, with the windows nailed shut to prevent eavesdropping. It's hot, stuffy, and tempers are flaring. You have delegates from large states like Virginia and small states like Delaware, and they are at each other's throats. The big states wanted representation in Congress based on population, which would give them all the power. The small states wanted equal representation, so they wouldn't be constantly outvoted and ignored. The argument became so bitter that the convention almost fell apart. Delegates threatened to walk out. Gunning Bedford of Delaware told the large states, "I do not, gentlemen, trust you. The small states will find some foreign ally of more honor and good faith, who will take them by the hand and do them justice." He was threatening to break up the Union and ally with a European power. This was treasonous talk. The dream was dying right there in the room. The solution came in what we now call the Great Compromise. It was messy, and nobody was perfectly happy with it. It created the two houses of Congress we have today, the House of Representatives, based on population, and the Senate, with 2 senators for every state. It was a compromise born of desperation, a last-ditch effort to save the Union from imploding before it even began. But this compromise came at a terrible price. To get the southern states to agree, the northern states had to make a dark and tragic bargain, the 3/5 compromise. This declared that for purposes of representation and taxation, each enslaved person would be counted as 3/5 of a person. It was a moral stain written directly into the fabric of the nation's founding document. A brutal political calculation that enshrined slavery into the new government. It's a deeply uncomfortable truth. The men who wrote "all men are created equal" simultaneously created a system that dehumanized millions to hold their fragile nation together. The democracy they built was for some, not for all. And this original sin would haunt America for generations, eventually leading to a bloody civil war. Finally, even after the Constitution was written, the struggle wasn't over. It had to be ratified or approved by the states, and many people hated it. They were called the Anti-Federalists, and they feared that this new, powerful central government would become just like the British monarchy they had just fought to escape. They worried it would crush individual liberties. Patrick Henry, the man who famously said, "Give me liberty or give me death," was a fierce opponent. He warned that the president would become a king and that the rights of the people would be trampled. The debate was furious. States like New York and Virginia were on the fence, and without them, the new nation would be geographically and politically split. The whole project could still fail. To counter this, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay launched an incredible public relations campaign. They anonymously wrote a series of 85 essays, published in newspapers, known as the Federalist Papers. These essays brilliantly and persuasively argued for the new Constitution, explaining how it would work and why it was necessary. It was a war of ideas, fought in print. Hamilton, the primary author, was writing at a feverish pace, sometimes churning out multiple essays a week. This intellectual marathon was crucial. The Federalist Papers helped sway public opinion, particularly in New York, and narrowly secured ratification. But the Anti-Federalists didn't lose completely. Their persistent, passionate arguments led directly to the creation of the Bill of Rights, to win over the skeptics. The Federalists had to promise to add amendments that would explicitly protect individual freedoms, freedom of speech, religion, the press, and more. So, the very rights that many Americans cherish most exist because of the loud, stubborn opposition of those who feared the Constitution's power. So when we look back at the founding of America, let's remember the full story. It wasn't a clean, straightforward march to freedom. It was a messy, desperate, and often ugly struggle. It was a story of starving soldiers in the snow, of angry farmers with pitchforks, backroom deals, and bitter compromises that came at a terrible moral cost. The American democracy wasn't handed down from on high. It was hammered out in the fires of crisis, built on the edge of failure, by imperfect people making impossible choices. Understanding these hidden struggles doesn't diminish their achievement. It makes it all the more remarkable.
Thanks so much for watching.
If you found this story as fascinating as I do, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the history you thought you knew. Let me know in the comments which part of this story surprised you the most. See you next time.